Coming up on New Day at Arirang, U.S. President Joe Biden wrapped up his three-day visit to South Korea, which included a summit with President Yoon. The U.S. President arrived in Tokyo on Sunday to take part in the Quad Summit. President Biden will hold talks with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Monday, where the two leaders will reaffirm their countries' close cooperation. Meanwhile, President Yoon will take part in the summit that will launch the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework virtually. Tottenham Hotspur's Heung-min wins the English Premier League's Golden Boot alongside Liverpool's Mohamed Salah, scoring 23 league goals this season. It marks the first time in EPL history that an Asian player has taken the top-scoring title.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Monday, May 23rd, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Oh Seong.
And I'm Lee Seung-jae. Thanks for joining us this morning, because over the next hour, we'll be giving you a look at some of the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on some of the key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Now, our top story this morning, U.S. President Joe Biden is now in Japan after wrapping up his three-day South Korea tour.
Before taking off for Japan, Presidents Yoon and Biden concluded their final day together, demonstrating the country's ironclad security alliance. Our Yoon with more.
A 7 decades-long security alliance that's getting stronger by the day. That's the message the commanders-in-chief of South Korea and the U.S. highlighted as President Biden wrapped up his three-day trip to South Korea, during which officials from both sides had braced for North Korea to thrust itself into the conversation with a nuclear or missile test. Marking their last engagement together in the Northeast Asian country this time, the two commanders-in-chief took the combat operations floor at Korean Air and Space Operations Center, the control center of South Korea's three-axis system.
날로 고도화되는 북핵 미사일 위협에 한미가 공동으로 대응하는 핵심적인 장소이고 한미 동맹을 상징하는 곳입니다. 오늘 바이든 대통령과 제가 함께 여러분들을 만나고 이 부대를 방문한 것은 한미 간의 강력한 이 안보 동맹을 상징하는 것입니다.
The three-axis system is a three-pronged system consisting of the Korean massive punishment and retaliation, an operational plan to incapacitate the North Korean leadership in a major conflict, the kill chain preemptive strike platform, and the Korea air and missile defense system. President Biden reaffirmed America's commitment to the defense of South Korea and their combined defense posture.
And now, 7 decades later, thanks to you, the Republic of Korea is strong, thriving, and innovating democracy, and our alliance grows stronger every single day because of you all. And by the way, we go together.
The two leaders bade farewell to each other with their thumbs up before parting ways. President Yoon to meet South Korean troops at the Master Control and Reporting Center, and President Biden to greet with U.S. service members and families at Osan Air Base before taking off for Japan. The two presidents met every day during Mr. Biden's three-day stay in Korea, where they tended to both business and security interests. South Korea's top office says Presidents Yoon and Biden's first engagement in Seoul this time serves as an opportunity for the two leaders to share profound ideas on freedom and liberal democracy, which will not only help further strengthen the alliance, but the personal bond between the two men. Yoon, Arirang News.
President Biden met on Sunday also with the chief of Hyundai Motor Group, Heung-min, who pledged more than $10 billion of investment in the United States, with a focus on eco-friendly cars and cutting-edge technology like urban air mobility, self-driving cars and artificial intelligence. Our Kim Hyun-sung with the details.
On his last day in Seoul, U.S. President Joe Biden met with Hyundai Motor Group chief Heung-min for a 50-minute-long one-on-one. Biden's meeting with the Hyundai Motor chief follows the automaker's announcement on Friday to spend more than $5.5 billion to build its first dedicated electric vehicle and battery manufacturing plants in the U.S. Hyundai's plan is in line with the Biden administration's agenda for a sustainable future.
My administration is supercharging efforts to lead the electric future. We're also making historic investments in battery manufacturing, clean transit, and light rail.
The plants will be located just outside Savannah, Georgia, and are expected to open by 2025. They're expected to create more than 8,000 jobs, but more to come. With Biden on Sunday, Hyundai CEO Chung-il-sung pledged to invest another $5 billion.
Hyundai Motor Group plans to invest an additional $5 billion through 2025, which will strengthen our collaboration with American enterprises in diverse technologies such as robotics, urban air mobility, autonomous driving, and AI.
More than $10 billion in U.S. investments. With these plans, Chung said the company will help the United States reach its carbon neutrality goals. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
US President Joe Biden on Monday is set to launch the IPEF, or Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. The framework intends to tie countries in the region together through shared interests, including clean energy, trade and infrastructure. The move is seen as a cornerstone of President Biden's strategy to counter China's growing regional influence. Currently in Tokyo, Biden will meet with Quad leaders from Japan, India and Australia, virtually for the IPEF rollout. South Korean President Yoon is also set to join the virtual summit. And President Yoon made it official. South Korea will take part in the new US-led initiative known as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and our Min Suk-hyun has the full details.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has officially announced to join the US-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. During a joint press conference with President Joe Biden, Yoon stressed the importance of the region and vowed to expand its contributions in the area.
인태 지역은 한미 모두에게 중요한 지역입니다. 한미 양국은 규범에 기반한 인태 지역 질서를 함께 구축해 나갈 것입니다. 그 첫걸음은 인태 경제 프레임워크 참여입니다. 우리의 영내 기여와 역할을 확대하기 위한 전략도 만들어 나갈 것입니다.
The IPEF, which President Biden first proposed last October, seeks cooperation in 4 main areas: fair and resilient trade, supply chain resilience, infrastructure, clean energy and decarbonization, and lastly, taxation and anti-corruption. Its purpose is to achieve regional cooperation on a wide range of issues and not just trade.
So it is not confined to economic or international issues concerning free trade and investment. It tries to encompass many other free democratic societies' characteristics like freedom of speech and corruption, more transparent society, including environmental issues and global warming issues and reduction of carbon consumption. So it is comprehensive. A totally comprehensive kind of international framework. And that's why this time IPEF is completely different from previous arrangements like, FTA or RCEP or CPTPP.
The new US-led economic pact will be joined by South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore, countries that are also part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, a mega trade bloc led by China. The framework is widely viewed as part of Washington's efforts to counter China's growing influence in the Asia-Pacific region. South Korea's government, however, dismissed those claims and said Seoul would closely communicate with Beijing. It also added that discussions are underway with China for additional FTA negotiations. Experts say that the government will not leave China out of its free trade talks.
China is just too close and it is just too big. China will always remain a major economic partner to Korea. And because China has grown so much as an economic power, there does need to be some rebalancing in the conditions of the FTA. So there will probably need to be some modification, renegotiation.
Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Now, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Sunday slammed the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy and said that it was doomed to fail. Now, he also said that it was a strategy to split sides and destroy peace. Now, his comments follow the South Korea-U.S. joint statement issued on Saturday. Although the statement didn't mention China directly, it did mention the Taiwan Strait and human rights. It said President Yoon Suk-yeol and U.S. President Joe Biden are both committed to protecting peace and stability in the South China Sea, including the Taiwan Strait. The joint statement also said that the two leaders share mutual concerns about human rights issues in the Indo-Pacific, including Myanmar's military coup, and will work to promote human rights. Now, President Yoon Suk-yeol and First Lady Kim Gun-hee attended a music concert on Sunday evening at the Blue House. The event was hosted by local broadcaster KBS to celebrate the opening of Cheongwadae to the public. The first couple sat among other attendees from where President Yoon briefly stood up to speak to the audience. He said the Blue House is an excellent cultural asset and that it belongs to the people. Officials say that more than 377,000 visitors have toured the former presidential office since it opened earlier this month. Now, today marks the 13th anniversary of former President Roh Moo-hyun's death. A commemorative ceremony will take place at 2 p.m. at the late president's final resting place, Bongha Village in Gyeongsang-namdo Province. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo will attend along with President Yoon Suk-yeol's aides and high-profile politicians from the ruling People Power Party. The move is largely seen as an effort by the conservative PPP to drum up support from the opposition bloc ahead of June 1st local elections. Meanwhile, to consolidate its liberal base, leaders from the main opposition Democratic Party will also attend, along with former President Moon Jae-in and former presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung. Now, in 2009, Roh jumped to his death from a cliff amid a corruption probe by state prosecutors into his family and aides. Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. Starting today, the South Korean government will recognize negative rapid antigen test results for travelers boarding flights to the country, on top of the PCR test results currently being accepted.
And with the quarantine period for visitors gone and the use of a less accurate testing method for entry into South Korea, will the country see an increase in the number of infections from overseas? To discuss this, we connect with Dr. Alice Tan, internist at Ms. Medi Women's Hospital. Very good morning to you, Dr. Tan. And well, first off, what are your thoughts about now accepting rapid antigen tests for inbound travellers to South Korea? Do you think the test is accurate enough to stop a flow of travellers who could potentially be infected with COVID-19?
Well, thank you for having me. That's a very good question. So, there's no test that's 100% accurate. And there has been good correlation between a positive PCR test and a positive rapid antigen test. The problem with rapid antigen tests is that they are very tied to, their sensitivity is very tied to how much virus is actually circulating in a person at the time of testing. So if there are high viral loads in the person, then a rapid antigen test will be positive almost 100% of the time. But when there are lower viral loads, then we start to have problems with false negative results. And we don't know exactly what that threshold level is in terms of, how low a viral load can we tolerate in terms of not being infectious, and then also having it be a false negative that we don't need to worry about. And so that's the question right now is, there will probably be false negatives because of the sensitivity of rapid antigen tests, but will these people who are false negative then go on to cause secondary transmission? We don't know exactly, what will happen. The thing about pre-departure testing, though, is when we are able to tolerate a lower stringency of testing, screening at the border, we want to make the process less burdensome for travelers. And of course, the advantage of rapid antigen testing is that it's much faster, much more economical, and so the burden burden is lower. I think it's reasonable to have a pilot program and maybe see for 2 weeks what the results are. But definitely, as you point out, the sensitivity is lower than a PCR test.
Always been kind of a big concern for me. Even my son, who tested negative for the rapid antigen test, later found out that he tested positive with the PCR test. So there's always some skepticism on that front. But Dr. Tan, also beginning June 1st, travelers arriving from abroad will be required to undergo a PCR test within 3 days of their entry to South Korea. Wouldn't it be safer to just keep the mandatory test requirement on the day of the arrival?
Well, this has to do with pre-symptomatic cases. So people who have been infected, but they don't have symptoms yet. And if the pre-departure test and the post-arrival test is spaced maybe 1 day or 36 hours apart, they could actually both be false negative. But if you have a pre-departure test and then the post-arrival test is, say, day 3, then that could be enough time actually to pick up more pre-symptomatic cases. So it's not necessarily a dangerous option. Of course, the concern would be for people who are going to break quarantine during the 3 days that they're in country, but they haven't been tested yet, if they happen to be positive for COVID and they don't know it yet just because they haven't been tested. So that's really the concern. I think if we make sure that people understand that they're not supposed to be mingling in public unless they test negative, that might be the option. Otherwise, if people don't have that understanding, the risk is much higher.
And Dr. Tan, the BA4 and BA5 subvariants that have been popping up recently, they add to the concerns, of course. And the question is really, can a person who already has been infected with the original Omicron variant be reinfected with the subvariants? Dr. Tan.
So the evidence so far is that natural infection with the original BA1 Omicron strain does not protect very well against reinfection with BA.4 or BA.5. And this is the concern right now in Europe because they are seeing an increase in cases in Portugal. We've also seen an increase in cases in South Africa, and it's primarily due to both BA.4 and BA.5. And so the concern is over the next weeks and months, there may be another surge in cases because of BA.4, BA.5, reinfection cases because of immune escape. In terms of the severity of reinfection, the cases may not be as severe. And that's a bit of good news because there will have been some immunity built up in the system in terms of cell-mediated immunity. But one thing to note is even though prior infection with BA.1 did not protect very well against reinfection, it was found that vaccine-induced immunity offered higher protection levels compared to prior infection. So for anyone who has been infected with Omicron, they should definitely get vaccinated too, because protection from prior infection is not enough.
Yeah, because I think there was a lot of people, including myself, who had been infected with the BA1 who, felt like maybe were basically, protected from all these new subvariants that are popping up. But also, I think a lot of people are basically saying, no use in getting vaccinated if you've already got the first Omicron, but I guess not the case. But speaking of these new subvariants and vaccinations as well, how effective are the current vaccines against these BA.4 and the BA.5 subvariants?
Well, it appears that BA.4, BA.5, these new subvariants do not cause more severe disease, especially in people who have had prior vaccination. So that is really the good news for right now, that for people who have been fully vaccinated, even if they are exposed to BA.4, BA.5, their risk for severe disease is not above and beyond what the risk was for the original Omicron or BA2 Omicron. But the flip side to that is for people who have not been vaccinated yet, the unvaccinated, the severity seems to be about the same. So, they are at high risk for developing severe disease if they do get infected with BA.4 or BA.5.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Tan, for your insights as always, and looking forward to speaking with you again next week.
Thank you.
And that's going to wrap up the first half of New Day at Arirang.
But do stick around. We have more coming your way in the second half, so we'll be back in just a moment.
Now, the global economy is expected to improve slightly this year. The Naval drop, but future economic indicators weren't so positive. Faster growth in emerging
The U.S.-China trade deal may be near, while a rally in global
For an economic outlook of South Korea's economy for 2020, we get a preview now from our business correspondent.
Arirang, what matters?
What made this all possible? LiDAR technology is being used to improve accuracy.
South Korean football star Heung-min has claimed the Premier League Golden Boot, the award given to the league's top scorer.
That's right, Seoul tied for the award with Liverpool's Mohamed Salah, as both finished the season with a total of 23 goals. Kim Yo-sun has more.
South Korean forward Heung-min of English Premier League side Tottenham Hotspur has become the first Asian player to win the league's Golden Boot after ending the season with a total of 23 goals. Heung netted twice in Tottenham's 5-0 victory over Norwich at Carrow Road on Sunday on the season's final day. Heung's dazzling performance helped his team secure 4th position in the EPL as well as a coveted place in next season's Champions League. Following the victory, he told BBC Sport that it was emotional to win the award, which was something he had dreamt of as a child. Now, South Korea has become the 13th nation to provide a Premier League Golden Boot winner, following countries including England, France, Egypt, and Senegal. Heung tied with Mohamed Salah of Liverpool as the league's top scorers. Both scored 23 goals. Remarkably, none of Heung's were from penalty kicks, while 5 of Salah's were. While Heung's right foot is said to be his strongest, he managed to score 12 left-footed goals over the course of the season. Heung was also crowned King of the Match for the 14th time this season against Norwich, winning over 76% of the votes. King of the Match is awarded to the game's best performer and is decided by an online fans vote. 김효선, 아리랑 뉴스.
For the first time, South Korean cars are number 3 in the European market. Hyundai and Kia in the first quarter of this year sold a combined 270,000 vehicles in Europe, an on-year increase of more than 21%, according to the Korea Automobiles Manufacturers Association. The growth was largely due to strong demand for eco-friendly vehicles. The two car makers ranked third after Volkswagen Group and Stellantis. They also had the third biggest market share in the United States, with sales of 320,000 units.
Now, in other news, Israel's health ministry says it has detected a suspected second case of the monkeypox virus in an Israeli traveler who recently returned from West Africa. This comes after the country reported its first case of the disease late last week amid a largely Europe-centered monkeypox outbreak of close to 100 cases. Austria reported its first case of the virus in a male patient who had symptoms typical of the illness. Now, this comes as U.S. President Joe Biden said the recent cases of monkeypox are something to be concerned about. He added work is underway to determine what vaccine might be effective. Now, come June 15th, South Korea will embark on its second space venture. This mission follows its first launch of a homegrown space rocket, Nuri, late last October. Our Yoon has more on the upcoming event.
This is a 75-ton rocket engine, dubbed the heart of the Nuri space rocket. For the first stage of the 3-stage launch of the Nuri, which was tested in October of last year, 4 of these 75-ton liquid engines were clustered together to create an engine capacity of 300 tons. For the second stage of the Nuri space rocket launch, which is scheduled for June 15th, a single 75-ton engine will be tested. These engines use advanced technology with kerosene as fuel and liquid oxygen and jet fuel as oxidizing agents. Though the first stage launch last fall failed to deliver its mock payload into orbit, its smooth flight marked a milestone in South Korea's aerospace history. The Nuri space rocket is South Korea's first completely domestically developed launch vehicle, meaning its heart, the engine, is completely homegrown.
The greatest significance is that the entire process from design, manufacture, and testing of this Korean launch vehicle was done independently in Korea. And the first liquid rocket engine has also been designed, developed, and tested domestically.
The private company in charge of developing the engine has already shipped out Nuri's 75-ton engine. But they're not finished yet. South Korea has become the 7th country in the world to possess homegrown space vehicle technology, which sets the stage for the country's space industry to grow and innovate further beyond the lunar orbit and to greater space expeditions.
The original plan was to make a space rocket to launch into lunar orbit. But in the evaluation process, we thought we should make something more powerful.
Following the Stage 2 launch in June and a third launch in 2023, the Nuri engine is expected to be test-launched another 4 times to ensure stability, after which engineers will continue to develop the technology for a next-generation space rocket engine. 이은진, 아리랑 뉴스.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, South Korean President Yoon and US President Joe Biden wrapped up their first bilateral summit together less than 2 weeks after Yoon took office. After holding talks that stretched well over the expected 90 minutes initially set for the two leaders, they emerged with a joint statement affirming stronger commitment to their traditional security ties as well as economic security. Now, today we unpack the highlights of their talks, and for this we're joined by J. James Kim, Director of the Center for Regional Studies at Asan Institute for Policy Studies, and Dr. Kim Se-wan, Professor of Economics at Ih Women's University. Thank you both so much for joining us. And my first question to you, Dr. James Kim. Now, strengthening extended deterrence, that was one large portion of the leaders' joint statement, obviously, and it mentions moving US strategic assets to South Korea and also the possibility of expanding joint military drills. So what do you think these things really tell us about the level of threat that the allies are perceiving from North Korea?
Hi, Xiang. I think
both South Korea and the U.S. Want to send a stern signal that it's no more anything goes for North Korea. So the leaders wanted to show that they are enhancing readiness and deterrence. And so the signal that they're sending is that they're serious about any kind of provocation from North Korea.
And Dr. James, what do you think really the reaction from North Korea is going to be? And China as well, because obviously they're very wary about the sort of security alliance that Seoul and Washington has.
Yeah, we can be concerned a bit about that, but there's nothing really new here from the point of view of North Korea or China, because our understanding of extended deterrence, it suggests that all options are on the table when it comes to the type of responses, and even, on things like rotational allocation of strategic assets. So, I think that there's really nothing new here for Pyongyang or China to get concerned about. But rightfully, I think we should be watching for any kind of responses if there are any.
Professor Kim Se-wan, now, economic security, that was another large portion of the two leaders' joint statement, and it took up a lot of their talks. And well, while most countries weren't too enthusiastic about the Indo-Pacific economic framework that South Korea pledged to join, what are the key reasons that Seoul is so enthusiastic about it?
Yes, new Korean government has recognized that participating in the Pacific economic framework is crucial in maintaining Korean economy's leadership in key industries like semiconductor, battery, automobile, and so on. Particularly to Korean economy, next several years are extremely important in staying at the frontiers of high-tech industries. Basically, this is why Korean government became active in Indo-Pacific economic framework. But the CPTPP is actually led by Japanese government, and U.S. government is not much into CPTPP. Even though U.S. government walked out of TPP in Trump administration in 2017, they decided not to go back to CPTPP in Biden administration. U.S. government wants to construct its own economic binding through Indo-Pacific economic framework.
And Dr. James Kim, well, many experts believe that perhaps the US doesn't have a clear strategy, an economic strategy for the Indo-Pacific region right now. And the response from Indo-Pacific countries towards IPEF has been rather lukewarm. So why do you think Seoul is so enthusiastic about this framework?
I think the key here is that IPEF is still in the formulative stage of its conception, and that and different countries are kind of waiting to hear what this agreement really is about. Having said that, I think that South Korea, it's prudent for South Korea to take part in this process of shaping the agenda for IPEF. If you recall, South Korea could not take part in shaping the CPTPP because it elected not to get involved early on. And so, when it comes to IPEF, we know that the United States very much is in the leadership position, along with other like-minded countries like Japan and others. But it will shape it will be the agreement or a framework that will set the standards for economic relations with these countries in the 21st century. And as I've said before, it's just prudent for the leadership in South Korea to get involved early on in this process rather than elect to not be involved when we all know that it will impact South Korea's national interest.
Professor Kim Se-wan, now some were hoping that perhaps showing support for IPEF and also America's push to forge a semiconductor alliance might get some export curbs or export controls removed, the US having some steel quotas for South Korean businesses. Do you think that would be possible, and why has President Biden been reluctant to remove them from South Korean companies when tariffs on Europe and Japan were eased for the most part?
I believe that U.S. government will lift the tariffs on Korean steel products sooner or later. Actually, over the last week's Korea-U.S. summit meeting, there was a high expectation that U.S. will take some forward-looking gesture on this matter. As of now, there's no reason for U.S. government to continue to impose tariffs on Korean steel products after ending tariffs on U.S., EU, and Japan steel products. When U.S. government is negotiating over steel tariffs with EU and Japan last year, I think there were some political considerations on Korean case. Like U.S. government wanted to hold a leverage to induce more cooperation from previous Korean government.
And Dr. James Kim, now the two leaders agreed that extended deterrence would also cover conventional threats, and they also pledged to revive the consultation group on extended deterrence. So what do these developments really indicate?
Well, it simply means that the concept of extended deterrence covers a broad range of threats posed by potential adversaries in the region. And that South Korea and the United States are jointly willing and able to respond to all of these threats. So it's a confirmation of the key principles underlying the concept of extended deterrence. And what both countries are saying is that we're willing to respond to any threats, not just nuclear ones. And I think it's meaningful in that regard, in sending a really important signal to potential adversaries who may be a threat to South Korea.
And Professor Kim Se-wan, now, do you think that IPEF is perhaps at this stage a more political platform, or do you think we are going to see more details on Monday when there's an announcement? Do you think it would actually take form as a multilateral institution or a trade pact?
As you said, U.S. President Biden is expected to officially announce the beginning of IPEF in Tokyo this week. In the structure of the IPEF, the relation between political purpose and economic purpose is mutually complementary, which means each purpose is helping the other. U.S. wants to constrain the big rise of China through building up a global production chain in high-tech industries with its allies. This is the real purpose of the IPEF. So Korean government believes that IPEF can accelerate Korean economy's development in high-tech industries in the future.
And Dr. James Kim, now President Biden is in Japan, of course, and he'll be meeting with the Japanese leader Fumio Kishida on Monday. And well, after that, what do you think will come next? How do you see South Korea and the US really strengthening their trilateral cooperation with Japan?
I think we'll hear more about trilateral cooperation in the months to come, but I don't think we should have an overly high expectations to see immediate changes. And that's because South Korea and Japan have elections that are scheduled in the next 2 months. And neither country would be willing to take chances ahead of those elections. But look for possible expansion of the scope and scale of joint exercises in the region, or through U.S.-led security initiatives like RIMPAC. We may also see more diplomatic engagement trilaterally in the weeks ahead.
And your views on this, Professor Kim Se-wan, what do you think will be the next steps in terms of the trilateral alliance going forward?
I pretty much agree with Dr. Kim's views on this matter. And in addition, I would say in the past, the economic relation with Japan has been dominated by political issues. As we have seen in the case of Abe administration's export banning key materials in semiconductor production in 2019, Korea and Japan go through unnecessary conflicts, but compared to previous government, the new government takes more positive gesture to Japan. Between Korea and Japan, there are lots of economic opportunities to share together in global market. For example, in the semiconductor industry, Korea and Japan are great partners already. Japan provides high-tech key materials, and Korea's semiconductor manufacturers produce finished product of semiconductor. The two countries can expand this kind of economic relationship further in other industries.
And Dr. James Kim, now wrapping up the summit, we had a rather unorthodox summit compared to previous South Korea-US summits. And a US leader really flying over first to meet a new South Korean president, that's been quite rare. It's not been seen in over 2 decades. And we also saw scenes of President Biden greeting Samsung leader Lee Jae-yong, who welcomed him to the company's chip factory, also speaking in English as well. So all these things, how do you think it really set the tone for the next few years in South Korea-US relations? Do you think they're going to perhaps enjoy closer ties now?
Yeah, and not to mention, 11 days after inauguration of President Yoon, President Biden makes this trip towards Asia, and his first stop happens to be Korea. So there are many meaningful things about this first meeting. I think it's fairly clear. There's an air of optimism for both Korea and the United States. There appeared to be good chemistry between the two men, and the joint statement showed that there was progress from the last summit, in that it included details which were not in the last joint statement. We talked about some of that, like IPEF and EDSCG. It also showed that both Biden and Yoon saw eye to eye on the notion of deepening and broadening comprehensive and strategic nature of the alliance by looking beyond the peninsula-related issues to begin addressing more global and regional issues together. I thought it was meaningful that the joint statement also touched on basic values like human rights and freedom, which wasn't emphasized as much in the Moon administration. And finally, as you mentioned, the fact that both Samsung and Hyundai signaled a willingness to step up to the plate and contribute towards these ends also showed that there was more corporate muscle behind the effort led by the two governments. I think overall, this is a really good start for President Yoon.
And Dr. James Kim, just another question to you. How do you think China would be perceiving all of this? Because there were some concerns that a closer step towards the US economically, diplomatically or security-wise, it was going to offend it no matter what. But especially with the IPEF launch coming on Monday, how do you think China is going to really respond to this?
Well, President Yoon, when he was running in the election, had a platform on China policy, which suggested that he was willing to move with the principle of mutual respect. I think the Chinese signaled a willingness to work with South Korea. I think Wang Qishan mentioned that during his visit inauguration. Foreign Minister Wang Yi reiterated that right after inauguration. If the Chinese are interested in engaging with South Korea, they should do so in a more positive way. And I think that that's what President Yoon is looking for. In many ways, I think that the principle of mutual respect requires that. So this is a really good test for Beijing. They need to follow through with what they proposed at inauguration. If we see a more confrontational approach, I think it will end up backfiring, not only in the form of non-cooperation from the leadership in Seoul, but also, the public sentiment for China has really turned negative, and I fear that it may even get worse.
And before we go, Professor Kim Se-wan, my final question to you. Well, in terms of economic security, which was highlighted very much during the two leaders' joint press conference, the actual 4 areas, semiconductors, batteries and key materials, as well as nuclear energy, these were highlighted as important sectors for both countries. So in terms of moving this relationship or these commitments forward, what do you expect to be the next few steps?
Well, to Korean economy, it is very important to participate in the frontier of the high-tech industry. We know that semiconductors, batteries, and automobiles are supporting Korean economy in a great scale. So for maintaining this kind of global competitiveness in more advanced industries like artificial intelligence and IoTs and so on, it is important to have a technology share with United States. Otherwise, it is very, very difficult to develop these industries without U.S. support. So I think it was a right choice to join the Indo-Pacific economic framework to further development of the Korean economy.
I see. And well, I'm afraid with time, this is where we'll have to end the interview today. That was J. James Kim, Director of the Centre for Regional Studies at Asan Institute for Policy Studies, and Kim Seon, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Australia, Anthony Albanese has been elected as the country's 31st Prime Minister. The win in Saturday's general election ends almost a decade of Conservative rule, with preliminary figures showing that the leading Labour Party is just 4 seats shy of the 76 House seats needed to form a government alone, with 14 seats still open. Final results could take some time, as 71% of the votes have been counted so far. Earlier, Conservative Prime Minister Scott Morrison called Albanese to concede defeat in the election and to congratulate him on his victory. In an address to supporters, Albanese said it was an extraordinary honour to lead the country. Over the weekend, the US saw polarizing weather events as a sizzling heat wave hit much of the East Coast, pushing temperatures in New York and Boston to near record highs. The National Weather Service said on Friday that temperatures reached as high as 35 degrees Celsius, much higher than the cool springtime weather of this time of year, which usually only reaches the lower 20s. Meanwhile, a late spring snowfall blanketed parts of Colorado on Saturday after temperatures plummeted across the state, falling 30 degrees in a single day. Local media reported that the cold conditions have left approximately 110,000 people without power. On Sunday, female presenters on local TV stations in Afghanistan voiced their frustration over a new Taliban ruling requiring them to cover their faces when on air. Initially announced on May 19th, the ruling comes days after authorities ordered women to cover their faces in public, signaling a return to the Taliban's past hardline rule and an escalation of restrictions. The Taliban's Minister of Vice and Virtue, Akif Muhajir, told Reuters face coverings for TV presenters were required from May 21st. Muhajir didn't specify what the consequences are for those who don't comply, but did add that presenters could wear a face mask. Turning to Bolivia, where a group of indigenous women have developed an app that could potentially help save the lives of users. The app informs users on women's rights and how to spot different types of violence. It also provides a platform for victims to find legal, psychological, and physical aid, and assistance is provided whenever the SOS button in the app is activated. Creators of the software, the Aymayras del Colasuyo Women Organization, have named it Felisa and Yanepiri, a Spanish word sounding similar to happy, and an Aymara word which means those who help. Last year, 108 women were murdered in Bolivia, while so far in 2022, a further 34 women have been killed. On Friday evening local time, Europe's tallest active volcano, Mount Etna, spewed smoke and red-hot lava into the night sky, with magma traveling down the mountain throughout the evening towards Lion Valley. Standing at 3,330 meters high, the volcano has spectacular eruptions several times a year, often sending lava and ash high over the Mediterranean island of Sicily. Located above the town of Catania, the volcano's frequent eruptions seldom cause damage. It is also believed to have the longest written record of eruptions of any volcano, with its first recorded observation going back as far as 425 BC, and the last major eruption occurring in 1992. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good morning. Well, some big heat for the capital region today. Highs will jump to 30 degrees Celsius here in Seoul, while Gyeongsang-do provinces will be even hotter today. And sunny skies will be a feature all day. Well, despite this scorching heat, those of us in Seoul and surrounding regions might need a face mask that can filter dust, as dust levels will be bad all day long today. The rest of the country will also see levels rising at times. Morning temperatures are similar to slightly higher than the same time yesterday, though the capital is covered with a thick layer of fog, so please tread with care. It's going to feel more like the middle or the end of July than late May this afternoon, and Chuncheon and Gyeongju will be going up to 31 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Sunny skies will boost UV levels to very high level across Korea except on Jeju Island. A dry air advisory remains in place on the East Coast. Hot spells remain through the first half of the week, then rain on Thursday will bring relief from the ongoing heat. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe. That wraps up our newscast for this morning, but we will be back again tomorrow for our Tuesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks for tuning in, and stick around for more updates throughout the day. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and as always, take care.
환영합니다. 웰컴 투 대구.
양배나 대구.
하이 라이 따지오.
대구니 요코소.
알람피 대구.
Bienvenido a Daegu.
Welcome you all. For the first time in Korea, the largest conference ever, the